Hello, my name is James Hooper, and this is a brief introduction to some video I've made comments on with the recent debate between the Prime Minister and Mr Abbott. You'll find it rather interesting and quite revealing in terms of the skills of the Prime Minister with relation to anchoring in persuasion. In this debate, Mr Abbott is on her left, so that on this occasion, and it can change, left is the side for placing negative issues. The right side is a place for stacking the positives. She aims to anchor the good things to herself and the less good to Mr Abbott. When talking about a good future, the Prime Minister will create a picture frame in front of her using two hands, which positions the good future in the space in front of her. She will also frame herself when talking about her past accomplishments. The point of this is that we, the audience, look through the positioned great future past accomplishments and see the Prime Minister, who by this action is associated with that past and future success. The Prime Minister will also alternate between having open hands to show she is hiding nothing and curled fingers, which in fact all point back towards her as she to associate herself with the good things she is describing. In a sense, she's just basically turning her fingers towards herself and pointing at me while she talks about the good things which create great feelings for us. She'll also do this alternating when picture framing herself on the great future under her government. So she'll do it for the past accomplishments and the future promises. It is also handy for the Prime Minister to have Mr Abbott on her left. As for most people, time moves from left to right, and we'll see that as we look at the panel journalist talking with this question in the middle of the video. We can position anchors anywhere. The key is to remember what they were and where we left them. If you mess it up, you can look a bit like the robot from the Space Family Robinson waving his arms all over the place. The value of anchors is that unless we are aware of them, they will unconsciously affect our feelings on a particular subject. These are just a few of the Prime Minister's physical anchors that she used. Obviously she used other ones, everyone does. But the Prime Minister is the first person I've seen in Australia who's applied them in public as a politician. It's an interesting skill. Whether it would make a great Prime Minister or not is something the electorate will decide, but it's good for the electorate to know that the Prime Minister does have these skills. Okay, so let's have a little play and see what our Prime Minister has been anchoring to. Generally on the right hand side things are positive, and on the left hand side negative. Now note also that Mr Abbott is over here. So let's draw him in there. We've got Tony in there. The other thing that will happen is that Julia will create a frame for herself, and she'll put her hands on either side of that frame, so that when she's talking about things that are positive, you'll notice that she's holding her hands up, so you look through past her hands at her while she's talking about important principles.
Tax on big companies like Coles and Woolworths, as Tony is proposing to do, guess what? Prices go up because they'll be looking to recoup that tax from consumers. Now that's Tony's policy setting. That's the reality of what he would do if he was Prime Minister. For families, I believe in taking a bit of pressure off. We've delivered tax cuts 3 years in a row. We created the education tax rebate.
Now remember that our Prime Minister is fairly new to this and she gets her hands mixed up. This is the positive side, this is the negative side, and Tony is over here. So whenever she says something positive, she generally will use her right hand, and something negative left hand, and when the things are positive they'll be pointing to her, which she'll do by putting her hands on either side there in a framing sort of motion.
We created the education tax rebate, and I've recently said we'd extend it to school uniforms, help with those costs of getting kids to school. We increased the childcare tax rebate to 50% of out-of-pocket cost, give that extra helping hand with the cost of childcare. We did a major increase in the pension to help older Australians particularly with the pressures that are on them. These are measures to help with cost of living. And then there's the other side of the equation, what's in your pay packet, which clearly is about your security at work. We ended work choices, delivered the Fair Work laws. I was very proud to do that as the relevant minister and get it through Parliament. And of course we've spent much.
Okay, let's look at that again. You see the nice frame being drawn here, while she talks about how pleased she was to be able to help with whatever that thing she was helping with. Okay, on her left hand side again, which is our negative, she's starting to talk about Tony, who's over there, and she stacked all the other negatives she can think of around here, generally so that they're directed over here.
The plan to bring back the worst aspects of work choices.
Right, the next question comes from Chris Hilton.
Ms Gillard, Australia is committed to a target of 5% reduction in carbon emissions by 2020, and you're committed to putting on a carbon price. How long can we go before we reach the point of no return? And what year will we get to where Australia can't meet that cut?
Now here you have an example of how the journalist is using the way he thinks through in time. In his mind, time goes from here to here, where this is the present and this is the future.
To delay is to deny.
Chris, I'm an optimist, and I believe we can work our way to a community consensus about putting a cap on carbon pollution and designing the market-based mechanism that will support that. Now, we had a consensus in Parliament House, and obviously Tony became opposition leader.
Okay, we now had consensus in Parliament House, another positive over here. Then she started talking about Tony again, and this week of not wonderful things that we've all been experiencing in terms of campaigns.
An end of that consensus, and the rest, as we all know, is history. Now I believe we've got to take the community with us to get a deep and lasting consensus, and if elected Prime Minister, then I will lead that debate to take the community.
Here we are again. She's leading that debate, doing all sorts of good things for the community. The positive, the right hand, gets pretty obvious after a while.
Debate to take the community with us. I'll work with some honest, decent Australians in our Citizens' Assembly to get the job done. And at the same time, we will be implementing measures that make a difference for carbon emissions. But I'm not going to kid people. We're not going to get to those targets unless we put a cap on carbon pollution and have a market-based mechanism. And Tony, I think, now rules that out entirely.
Well, lucky Tony, he's getting all these lovely negative aspersions thrown over here because he's ruling out all the wonderful things that are over here on the right-hand side. So he's positioned with all the negatives, and she's over here with her right hand positioned with all the positives.
And what that means is under his plan, we would see him pay polluters and carbon pollution go up by 13% by 2020. It's not the way forward. I'm going to lead to get a community consensus.
And here we are with her leading. There's her frame. As we look through that frame, we see her leading, and that's generally over here with all the positive stuff.
Way forward. In the meantime, we'll be acting. Record investments in solar and renewables.
Now this is an interesting one. She's created a barrier here between herself and those nasty people over here where all the negatives are, and said these are all the positive things, and if you stay with us you'll get all these positive things.
Bring that power to your home through the national electricity grid, changing the cars we drive, making differences to where we work with greener buildings, no more dirty power stations, as well as rewarding those companies that do the right thing early.
But Prime Minister, the question is...
Okay, and this... Okay, now here she messes up slightly and throws out a positive with the right hand. Remember, generally we want to do a negative with the left hand and positive with the right, but she corrects it fairly quickly. It takes a fair bit of practice to get the skills right where you don't get your hands muddled up.